Hello and welcome to this University of York course on inclusive learning for students. Focus on building inclusive practice into your life during higher education and beyond. This course is designed to introduce you to a range of principles and discussions that underpin inclusive learning and teaching within higher education, to enable you as a student to engage with and promote inclusion, both in your academic studies and within your wider university experience. Most importantly, we hope this course can be used as a tool for self-reflection and personal learning. Throughout the course, you will discuss key topics about inclusive practice within higher education, identifying what you can do to encourage and support communities within your institution, engaging with key debates around decolonizing and diversifying the curriculum, and reflecting on what inclusive practice means for you as a student and an individual. We will also be encouraging you to develop your reflective practice as one of the key objectives of this course, and we encourage you to engage with your own unique positionality within higher education environments. It's important to remember when engaging with the topics in this course that everyone has differences in their understandings of inclusion and will also have different experiences of interacting with the concepts that we are looking at. The course is adaptable for all types of learners and demonstrates frequently that there is often no right or wrong answer. You will hear from students and staff during the course who will be sharing their own perspectives. We should remember to be respectful and open to others around us, even when their experiences and perspectives differ from our own. So let's get started. Week 1 will begin by looking at the underlying guiding principles of inclusive learning. What do we actually mean by inclusive practice? And how does this link to other concepts such as accessibility and equality? Then we will have a look at some basic everyday tools through which you can facilitate and promote inclusive practice for yourself. We hope you enjoy the course.
To me, inclusive learning means designing in flexibility, choice, accessibility, and diverse perspectives.
Inclusive learning means that both inside and outside of the lecture theatre, our academic discussions, debates, and conversations as a community are inclusive of all perspectives and lived experiences in order to truly reflect the diversity of the country and the world we live in.
Inclusive learning is important because there isn't just one or two types of learners, there are many types. Without inclusivity, institutions will always be biased towards the mainstream methods of learning and teaching implemented by the dominant learner groups, and the minority groups will always be playing catch-up.
Inclusive learning is about making sure every student, no matter their background, identity, disability, or extra challenges they may face, feels comfortable, confident, and supported, both in face-to-face and independent study. It can make the difference between someone dropping out of higher education unnecessarily and someone achieving their highest potential.
Inclusive learning means curating an accessible and welcoming learning community that recognises the diversity of people and embraces their identity and experiences. Providing an inclusive education whereby students are not only provided with equal opportunity but a sense of belonging demonstrates the commitment of the institution to their students' well-being.
An inclusive community allows more students to engage meaningfully with a diverse curriculum and have the opportunity to achieve their potential. When learning in an inclusive community, students can experience diverse culture which can prepare them for a future in an increasingly diverse working environment.
Inclusive practice starts with critical thinking, growing our capacities to think critically about ourselves and others in the world, and imagining ways to move beyond boundaries and systems of oppression. For me, inclusive practice should create spaces of radical openness, where diversities and commonalities are explored, dissent is encouraged, and mutual learning is committed to.
As an international student, inclusive learning means providing an accessible and welcoming space for people from different backgrounds to communicate their ideas and thoughts without being judged.
To me, inclusive learning means valuing and drawing on the diversity of our student body to enhance our provision. It also means ensuring that we work to eliminate institutional barriers to student success for all of our students.
Coming from an underrepresented group in higher education, I perceive inclusive learning to be crucial to building a university community where we can all succeed and learn from each other. Inclusive learning allows marginalised groups to participate and succeed, and opens the doors to marginalised research approaches. Striving towards inclusive learning will make our community more vibrant, rich and exciting.
For me, dialogue is one of the most effective ways of engaging students and staff to have conversations about learning and teaching. Dialogue is intimately linked to inclusion. As the wonderful Bell Hooks reminds us, to engage in dialogue is one of the simplest ways we can begin as teachers, scholars, and critical thinkers to cross boundaries, those barriers that may or may not be erected by race, gender, class, professional standing, and a host of other differences.
If institutions can reaffirm to their students and staff the value of inclusive environments in facilitating communication and learning together, they may be able to encourage their engagement in discussions.
I am encouraged to take part in discussion sessions because of the salience of the issues at hand, and also because I am implicated and understand how harmful the exclusionary practices in teaching can be to individual development and mental health. I think better representation and continuous reflection on language could help increase participation.
I think people need time to reflect on their experiences, positionality, their interactions and their influence. We should encourage, support and incentivise constructive reflection through dialogue. For example, reverse mentoring and group mentoring schemes can be used to facilitate this.
The best way of encouraging participation and engagement in teaching and learning is to provide multiple ways students can access and contribute. For example, on my course, all sessions are recorded, so students who can't make it to a session or might struggle with processing or note-taking can access material at a time and pace that suits them.
All contributions should be valued in an open and supportive way. I like to be invited to contribute, but not pressured. It really helps to have a no blame, no shame way of indicating that not contributing is okay. Equally, it's important that a facilitator ensures that the discussion is not dominated by a small number of individuals.
Acknowledging that we don't have all the answers is a good start to encouraging discussion. Being clear that no answers are wrong answers, and that to truly make change on a local or national level, there are small things that we can all do.
Critical and inclusive dialogue requires thought. It requires us to consider what barriers exist for specific groups and individuals, to think about what power dynamics within spaces and relationships, and to deliberately talk about them. In my experience, this works best when we foreground each other's individual voices, perspectives and stories. Ultimately, this form of engagement requires trust and vulnerability, which can only be achieved if the teachers and students are willing to learn from each other.
Being aware and reflective of how we use language is an important part of fostering an inclusive environment. Language, including the words we use and the ways we express ourselves, is often taken for granted. We might not realize the effect that it can have. This is particularly true when thinking about the link between language and our identities. Language is closely connected to one's identity, from our names to our accents, and more widely relating to characteristics such as class, ethnicity, and gender. When we think about inclusive language in this way, it can cover a wide range of practices that can include anything from getting someone's name right and asking about how one identifies themselves in terms of gender and ethnicity. The key is not to make assumptions based on your perception. Let's use BAME as an example. This acronym is constructed in a British context. Some people do not identify with it, and many from other cultural backgrounds might not understand it. Imposing these labels can be harmful and alienating. If the situation is appropriate, just ask how people identify themselves. One practice that is more common now is to state your own or as someone's pronouns. While this is inclusive practice, bear in mind that in some languages, pronouns are not necessarily gendered. For me, the use of they took some unlearning and relearning. And in some other English-speaking countries, people might use Z as in ZE or XE. Moving away from the Anglo-centric approach can enrich our knowledge, learning about how other languages and cultures have conceptualized gender. At the University of York, we study and work in the UK. It is often assumed that English is the default, and the system is set up as such. Still, as we're thinking more about decolonizing the curriculum and EDI, it is a good opportunity for us to reflect upon the hierarchy and power dynamics of language. Who can speak? In what tone? Whose and what kind of voices are silenced? These questions will further allow us to think about the power in knowledge construction. If we're only focusing on resources available in English, what other type of knowledge are we missing? An appreciation of indigenous knowledge and diverse cultural understandings can broaden our views. It enriches our learning as well as fostering an inclusive environment. What might be good practices when it comes to inclusive language? Listen to each other. Take time and space to reflect. Don't be afraid to ask. But also remember that languages and identities change, so we need to stay open-minded and ready to challenge ourselves. Think about the assumptions that we are making with our use of language. When I say we, who are we?
Recently diagnosed or are seeking a diagnosis and finding out more information, and this will certainly be of interest to you. I'm very interested in what I call the double empathy problem and the two-way issues and reciprocity between people of differing dispositions, as I call it, and how that lack of understanding can be quite a significant thing in escalating problems, and understanding the autistic way of being and thinking, perceiving in the world, and kind of gaining access to that and building rapport with people through that, a bit like Phoebe Caldwell's kind of work in intensive interaction kind of area. I think it's much needed. As I said earlier, another way in which people can achieve flow-like states is in social interaction, like with the well-acquainted close friend. And this is often taken for granted by most non-autistic people because it's something that's found on a frequent basis. But in a sense, it's a bit of a rarity for at least many people on the autism spectrum. Getting that social recognition and connection. A while ago, I had a conversation with Phoebe Caldwell, which I'm sure you should have heard of. And she was saying a thing which more non-verbal autistic people and learning disabled people, she was suggesting that people underestimate all the time, is how lonely they are and how much there's a need to engage with other people on their own terms, be understood, feel respected and listened to, and the rest of it. And because they might not be able to voice that, and they might behave in various unconventional ways, people might miss out on that. And she said sometimes even when people are sort of grabbing and pinching stuff and getting an emotional reaction and a sense of getting a connection with another human being. And the double empathy problem. This title slide here with this picture is of a book I had published a few years ago. And so if you're interested in this topic and want to look at it in further depth, then this book would be a good place to start. And I'll start with a quote from a couple of thousand years ago. That's the publishing date there, not when it was written. And the Dialogues of Plato, where Socrates is talking to one of his students. And Socrates says, "Can you point out any compelling rhetorical reason why he should have put his arguments together in the order that he had?" And his student replies, "You do me too much honour if you suppose that I am capable of divining his motives so exactly." So what this quote is showing is that people know that other minds exist and that they think differently from one another, but also that it's rather difficult to interpret the motivation of other people and their intentions. A version of the double empathy problem. And to quote them, views psychopathology not merely as disordered function within single brains, but also as a dynamic interpersonal mismatch that encompasses various levels of description. Or in the book I wrote a few years back, I called it a mismatch of salient. And before I go, I'd like to talk about how the double empathy problem also forms part of a wider power relationship for those who have the power to define themselves and to define others. And those that have power in society can determine how those in a relative position of powerlessness are interpreted and talked about, as the feminist Iris Marriott-Young points out. And notions such as ableism and mansplaining can be seen as having roots in similar notions of a taken for granted unconscious frame of reference which renders the other invisible. And I came up with my own version of this, which related to psychological explaining or psych-splaining around individuals. And this is the power relationship and a lack of empathy, which could be and can become part of the problem of mental distress that autistic people suffer, is misunderstanding, especially within mental health support. So